She was huddled under a store awning, clutching only a dirty piece of cardboard. At 5 years old, she had already learned that sleep was the only escape from the hunger gnawing at her insides. But when a millionaire's Cadillac stopped at that red light, everything changed. What he discovered about the child's background would shatter his heart and reveal a connection that would forever alter both of their destinies. Subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories every day. The mirrored elevator reflected the millionaire's impeccable image as it ascended towards the penthouse. Custom-tailored Italian suit, shoes that cost more than minimum wage, a Swiss watch that marked not only the hours, but the weight of a life built on numbers and loneliness. At 42, he had achieved everything a man could dream of. A fortune that grew even as he slept, companies spread across 3 continents, apartments in Paris, New York, and São Paulo. But the wealth had taken its toll. A widower for 5 years, since his wife succumbed to a rapid cancer, he had taken refuge in work, like a shipwrecked sailor clings to a plank. There were no children to carry on his name, no laughter echoing through the marble halls of his penthouse. Only the incessant ticking of expensive clocks and the low hum of the air conditioning that kept everything at the perfect temperature, except his heart. That afternoon's meeting had been particularly successful. The figures presented by the directors showed profits that exceeded even the most optimistic expectations. New investments in technology, strategic acquisitions, international partnerships. The empire grew, relentless as a tide that knows no bounds. For 3 hours, he had heard words like maximization, optimization, and profitability repeated like mantras by middle-aged men who, like him, had traded their souls for Excel spreadsheets. When he finally said goodbye to his partners with firm handshakes and professional smiles, the millionaire felt the familiar weight of empty victory. Another achievement, a few more million, another night alone in his ivory tower. The chauffeur was waiting for him in the underground garage, uniformed and silent as always. 20 minutes of traffic to his penthouse, where a dinner prepared by the housekeeper awaited him, already cold and solitary. The car glided through the bustling downtown streets as he checked emails on his phone. Merger proposals, financial reports, invitations to charity events in which he participated only out of social obligation. His life had become a predictable sequence of empty commitments and successes that brought no joy. Sometimes, in the quiet of the night, he wondered if it was really worth it, if the boy he once was, full of dreams and hopes, would recognize the man he had become. That's when the light turned red. The car stopped in front of a clothing store that had already closed hours ago. The awning sheltered an illuminated display window that showcased mannequins dressed in the new collection. But it wasn't the mannequins that caught his attention. In the shadows of the awning, almost invisible to the hurried eyes of passers-by, a small figure was huddled against the wall. It was a girl. She couldn't have been more than 5 or 6 years old. Dark, tangled hair fell over a thin face, almost translucent in the yellowish light of the street lamp. She was clutching a piece of cardboard as if it were the most precious pillow in the world, and a dirty, faded cloth served as a makeshift blanket. Beside her, a plastic bag contained an empty bottle and what appeared to be a piece of bread. The millionaire lowered the car window, ignoring the air conditioning that escaped into the warm night. He watched her for long seconds, mesmerized by a vision that seemed to come from another planet. In his world of crystal and marble, children like that simply didn't exist. They were statistics in government reports, abstract numbers in advertising campaigns for NGOs. Never real faces, never palpable pain. Hundreds of people passed by her without even slowing down. Executives with briefcases, students with headphones, couples holding hands. They all seemed to have developed a selective blindness that allowed them to see shop windows, traffic lights and signs, but made them completely insensitive to that small life trying to survive on the cold concrete of the city. The girl stirred slightly, adjusting her small body on the cardboard. Even sleeping or pretending to sleep, there was something resigned in her movements, as if she had already learned that screaming or crying was useless, as if she already knew that the world had decided to ignore her existence. The light turned green. The chauffeur waited for a command, but the millionaire remained silent, his eyes fixed on the small figure. Cars honked behind them, impatient with the delay. The life of the city continued its frenetic rhythm, indifferent to that moment of pause, to that crack that was opening in the heart of a man who had forgotten how to feel. "Sir," murmured the chauffeur, hesitant. For a moment, the millionaire considered asking to move on, go back to his penthouse, to his cold dinner, to his organized and predictable life. Pretend he hadn't seen anything, that image hadn't been etched on his retina like a branding iron. But something deeper than reason prevented him from leaving. An inner voice that he hadn't heard for decades whispered words he was trying not to understand. "Pull over," he said finally, his voice coming out hoarser than usual. "Sir." "Pull over. I'm getting out." The asphalt still radiated the heat accumulated during the day when the millionaire stepped onto the sidewalk. His Italian shoes, accustomed to Persian rugs and marble floors, touched the uneven concrete with a strangeness that made him hesitate for a moment. The smell of the night city hit him like a wave: exhaust fumes, street food, sweat and rush. A universe completely distant from the air-conditioned and perfumed environment of his corporate world. He walked slowly towards the awning, each step loaded with a hesitation he couldn't explain. Executives passed by him without recognizing him, hurrying home after another day of work. None of them looked down, where a child was trying to become invisible against the cold wall of the store. As he approached, he could see better the details that distance had softened. The girl was even thinner than he had imagined. The thin arms that hugged the cardboard were marked by small cuts and scratches, probably a consequence of the rough streets where she was trying to survive. Her clothes, if they could be called that, were a combination of poorly sewn patches, too big for her frail body. But it was when he saw her face that the millionaire felt something shatter inside his chest. Even in the dim light, it was possible to see the delicate beauty that malnutrition was trying to hide. Prominent cheekbones, chapped lips, but eyes that held a disturbing depth for someone so young. It wasn't just hunger that marked those features. It was an old sadness, a resignation that no child should ever know. He crouched down slowly, trying not to scare her. The movement was careful, almost reverent, as if he were approaching an injured animal that could flee at the slightest abrupt gesture. His hands, accustomed to shaking hands in multi-million-dollar deals, trembled slightly as he extended one towards the child. "Hello," he whispered, his voice sounding strange even to himself. The girl opened her eyes slowly, without haste, as if waking up was a painful process. When she finally focused on the man's face in front of her, there was no startle or fear, just a silent assessment, as if she had already learned to gauge people's intentions by their eyes. What she saw there made her relax slightly, although she still maintained a defensive posture. "Are you hungry?" he asked, surprised by his own question. It wasn't something planned. The words simply escaped his lips. She watched him for a few more seconds before nodding slightly. The gesture was almost imperceptible, but it carried a weight that made the millionaire's stomach clench. He remembered the snack he had bought at the office and left in the car, a gourmet sandwich that cost more than many families spent on food in a week. "Wait here," he said, getting up. "I'll get you something." He walked back to the car with quick steps, ignoring the driver's confused look. He grabbed the wrapped sandwich and a bottle of French mineral water that he always kept in the vehicle. When he returned, the girl hadn't moved. It was as if she had learned that waiting motionless was the safest way to survive. He crouched down again and extended the food. Small, thin hands emerged from inside the dirty cloth to receive the offering. But instead of eating immediately, as he expected, the girl did something that left him completely disarmed. She pressed her face against the sandwich. The gesture was so delicate, so loaded with silent gratitude, that the millionaire felt his eyes sting. The child inhaled deeply the aroma of the food, as if she wanted to absorb not only the smell, but the hope that it represented. Only then, with careful movements, did she begin to unwrap the sandwich. "Do you sleep here every night?" The question escaped his lips before he could censor it. The girl stopped eating and looked him directly in the eyes. It was a look that went through him like a blade, loaded with a cruel wisdom that shouldn't exist in someone so young. When she spoke, her voice was just a whisper, but each word echoed in the man's mind like a scream. "I sleep a lot to forget the hunger. When my tummy hurts, I close my eyes and pretend I'm in a place where there's food." The world stopped. The child's words hit the millionaire like a punch to the gut, making him stagger even while crouching. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. The sentence echoed in his mind, mixing with echoes of the past that he had buried decades ago. Another child's voice, another thin face, other small hands that reached out for help. His youngest sister. The memory surfaced like an avalanche, destroying the barriers carefully built over the years. Elena was only 4 years old when the fire devastated the tenement where they lived. He managed to escape, but when he went back to get her, it was too late. The neighbors said she had died trying to hide under the bed, too scared to scream for help. But there was another memory, even more painful, the night before the fire, when Elena had said exactly the same words he had just heard, "I sleep a lot to forget the hunger." He was only 2 years older, but he had promised that one day they would get out of that life. That one day she would have so much food that she would never have to sleep to forget the pain. He fulfilled half of the promise. He got out of poverty, built an empire, became everything he had dreamed of being. But Elena wasn't there to see it. And worse, he had become so obsessed with his own ascent that he had completely forgotten about the other children who, like his sister, still slept hungry on the streets of the city. "What's your name?" he whispered, his voice choked. The girl watched him cautiously before answering, "People call me a lot of things, but my real name almost no one knows." "And what is it?" "It doesn't matter," she said, going back to eating the sandwich with small, careful bites. "Names are only good when someone wants to call us, and no one ever calls me." The brutal simplicity of that answer was like a shot to the millionaire's heart. He understood at that moment that it wasn't just a hungry child he had found. It was a piece of his own soul that he had judged lost forever. It was Elena coming back to show him that there was still time to fulfill the promise he had made decades ago. The millionaire went home that night, but sleep didn't come. Lying in his king-size bed, surrounded by the silent luxury of his penthouse, he couldn't stop thinking about the girl under the awning. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that thin little face, and the eyes too old for her age. Her words echoed in his mind like a painful mantra. "I sleep a lot to forget the hunger." He got up before dawn and walked to the panoramic window that offered a privileged view of the city. Down below, millions of people were already moving in the streets, each carrying their own burdens, their own stories. How many other children like that girl were waking up at this moment, facing another day of abandonment? How many little Elenas had he ignored during all these years? The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was his personal assistant, reminding him of the busy schedule that awaited him: meeting with Japanese investors at 9, lunch with the Secretary of the Treasury, conference with the board in the afternoon. The money-making machine needed to keep running, and he was the centerpiece of that relentless gear. Throughout the morning, he tried to focus on business, but his mind insisted on wandering. In the middle of the presentation on expansion into the Asian market, he found himself wondering if the girl had managed to sleep well, if someone had given her breakfast, if she was safe. The numbers on the screen suddenly seemed futile in the face of the memory of those eyes laden with resignation. "Sir?" The voice of one of the investors brought him back to reality. "Would you care to comment on the profitability ratios for the third quarter?" He swallowed hard and forced a professional smile, returning to the role he had been playing for decades. But inside, a silent war had begun. Part of him, the part that had built that empire, whispered that he couldn't get involved, that a life had been sacrificed to get there, and he couldn't throw it away because of a moment of sentimental weakness. "You have responsibilities," murmured the voice of reason. "Employees who depend on your success, shareholders who trust in your decisions. You can't just abandon everything because of a child you found on the street." But there was another voice, weaker but more persistent, that reminded him of the unfulfilled promises. "Elena trusted you," it whispered, "and you abandoned her. Are you going to do the same thing to this girl?" Lunch with the secretary was an exercise in autopilot. He said the right words, smiled at the appropriate moments, discussed economic policies with his usual fluency. But his mind was miles away, on an awning where a child had learned that sleeping was better than feeling pain. When he finally managed to escape the office in the late afternoon, he instructed the driver to take the same route as the night before. His heart raced as the car approached the store, and he felt a mixture of relief and anguish to see that the girl was still there. She seemed even smaller in the daylight, even more fragile. She had managed to get another piece of bread from somewhere, and she chewed slowly, making each crumb last as long as possible. When she saw him approaching, her eyes lit up for an instant before returning to their usual cautious expression. "You came back," she said, and there was genuine surprise in her voice. Yes," he replied, feeling suddenly foolish. "I brought more food." He extended a bag with sandwiches, fruits, and a bottle of juice. This time, she didn't smell the food first. She just murmured an almost inaudible thank you and began to eat with the same parsimony as always. "Why don't you go to a shelter?" he asked, crouching down beside her. The girl stopped chewing and looked at him with an expression that mixed sadness and irony. "I've tried. They say you need documents, a guardian, a lot of things I don't have. And when they do accept you, sometimes there are bad people inside. It's safer here." The simplicity of that explanation left him speechless. A 5-year-old child had developed a survival system that the adults responsible for protecting her had failed to offer. She had learned to navigate the cruel bureaucracy of institutional abandonment and chosen the solitude of the street as the lesser of evils. What if someone wanted to really help you? The words came out before he could stop them. The girl's eyes narrowed slightly, as if she were assessing whether this was a trick. What kind of help? Food, every day. A warm place to sleep. Maybe even school. And what do you want in return? The question hit him like a bucket of cold water. Here was a 5-year-old child who had already learned that nothing in life comes free, that every offer of help hides a price to be paid. What kind of experiences had she lived through to develop this distrust? "Nothing," he replied, surprised by his own answer. I don't want you to sleep on the street." She studied him for long seconds, as if she were trying to decipher a complicated puzzle. Then she shook her head slowly. "People always want something. You seem nice, but it's better if I stay here. At least here I know what to expect." The millionaire felt his heart shatter a little more. He understood that it wasn't just hunger that had destroyed the childhood of that girl. It was the total loss of trust in human goodness. She had learned that accepting help could be even more dangerous than facing the cold and hunger alone. He stayed there for another hour, talking about simple things. He discovered that she knew how to read some words, learned through the signs and posters of the city, that she was afraid of big dogs, but loved the little ones that sometimes appeared in the nearby park. That her dream was to have a doll, not to play with, but to have someone to talk to during the long nights. When he finally said goodbye, promising to return the next day, The millionaire knew that he had reached a point of no return. He could no longer pretend that he hadn't seen her. He could no longer go back to his life as if that meeting hadn't happened. But he also knew that helping her wouldn't be simple. It wasn't enough to give money or food. He needed to gain the trust of someone who had learned to survive by distrusting everyone. He needed to prove that not all adults were predators disguised as saviors. And more than anything, he needed to face his own demons. Because saving that girl meant in some way forgiving himself for not having been able to save Eleanor. It meant accepting that perhaps it was never too late to fulfill the promises of the past. In the days that followed, the millionaire established a routine that he had never imagined possible. Every afternoon, after fulfilling his business commitments, he instructed the driver to stop on the same corner. He brought food, blankets, sometimes even medicine when he noticed that the girl had a cold. Gradually, he began to understand the small survival rituals that she had developed. He discovered that she always woke up before dawn, when the street sweepers passed by with their brooms and hoses. This was the most dangerous moment, as some employees expelled her with unnecessary violence. She had learned to shrink even more, to become almost transparent until they passed. Then when the city awakened and the first people began to circulate, she assumed the position that had become her trademark, hugging the cardboard, pretending to sleep so as not to bother anyone. The girl began to tell him more about her routine. On Tuesdays, an elderly lady who worked at the nearby bakery sometimes gave her bread that could no longer be sold. On Thursdays, a group of young evangelicals distributed soup in the park 2 blocks away. Saturdays were the worst days because the bars got crowded and drunk people sometimes had fun tormenting those who slept on the street. Each revelation was a stab in the millionaire's heart. How had such a small child developed such a precise mental map of urban cruelty? How had she learned to navigate a world where survival depended on memorizing the schedules of the few gestures of compassion? One afternoon, he brought a new blanket, soft, warm, with colorful patterns. The girl's reaction surprised him. She touched the fabric with reverence, as if it was something sacred, but then shook her head. "I can't keep this," she said, returning the blanket. "Why not?" "It's too pretty. Someone will want to take it from me. It's better if I use things that no one wants." The logic of survival on the streets was ruthless. Even gestures of kindness had to be calculated, measured against the possibility of arousing the envy or greed of others. The girl had learned that being invisible not only meant not bothering anyone, it meant not owning anything that could spark the interest of others. It was then that the millionaire understood that it wasn't enough to offer things. He needed to offer security, and security couldn't be bought. It was built through trust. And trust took time. He began to bring more subtle gifts, children's storybooks, which she leafed through with curiosity even though she couldn't read all the words. Small toys that fit in her pocket and could be hidden easily. A small flashlight for the darkest nights, things that improved her life without making her a target. During these afternoon conversations, the millionaire also began to share pieces of his own story. He told about Elena, about the difficult childhood, about how he had struggled to escape poverty. At first, he did this unconsciously, as if the words sprang on their own from some deep place that he had long kept sealed. "You had a sister?" the girl asked one afternoon after he mentioned Eleanor for the 3rd time. "I did. She died when I was little." "Died how?" The direct question, asked with the cruel simplicity of children, forced him to confront details that he had never verbalized to anyone. "In a fire. I managed to escape, but she didn't." The girl was silent for a long time, absorbing the information. Then, with a wisdom that left him breathless, she said, "That's why you stop here every afternoon. You think I'm her." The observation hit him like a punch to the gut. Was it true? Was he trying to save that girl, to save Elena retroactively? Or was there something deeper happening there? Maybe a little, he admitted, surprised by his own honesty. But you're not her. You're you, and you deserve to be helped for being who you are, not for reminding me of someone. And who am I? The question echoed in the air like a challenge. Who was that girl, besides an abandoned child sleeping under an awning? What was her story, her dreams, her deepest fears? The millionaire realized that, despite visiting her every day for weeks, he still knew very little about her as a person. "I would like to find out," he replied, "if you let me." It was that afternoon that she finally told him her real name. It wasn't just a name, it was a small biography condensed into a few words. She had been born in a public hospital, the daughter of a young woman who worked as a cleaner. The father never knew of her existence. The mother had struggled for 5 years to raise her daughter alone, doing odd jobs, living in rented rooms in cheap boarding houses. When the mother got sick and couldn't work anymore, they were evicted. They lived a few months on the street together, the mother protecting her daughter as best she could, teaching her the tricks of urban survival. When the illness worsened and the mother was admitted to a public hospital, the girl was left alone. She visited her mother when she managed to bypass security. But one day, when she arrived there, the bed was empty. "No one told me she had died," the girl recounted without drama, as if she were reporting something routine. "I asked the nurse, and she said I had to look for my family. But there was no one, so I went back to the street." The story was told in a fragmented way over several afternoons. Each piece revealed was like a piece of a painful puzzle that the millionaire tried to assemble in his mind. He began to understand that he wasn't just dealing with an abandoned child. He was facing someone who had lost everything she loved and still found the strength to wake up every day and keep fighting. It was then that he made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. "I want to get you off the street," he said on a rainy Thursday when he found the girl wetter and shivering than usual. "We've already talked about this." "No, listen. I'm not talking about a shelter or an orphanage. I'm talking about coming to live with me, in my house, as family." The silence that followed was deafening. The rain drummed on the awning above them, creating a curtain of sound that isolated that moment from the rest of the world. The girl stared at him with an expression that he couldn't decipher. Surprise, fear, hope, and distrust mixed in a look that seemed too old for that young face. "Why would you do that?" she asked finally. Because I think we need each other." It was the rawest truth he had ever spoken in his life. It wasn't just altruism or guilt over the past. It was a mutual need that had grown between them during those weeks of daily meetings. He needed her as much as she needed him, she to survive, he to come back to life. The girl lowered her eyes, focusing on her small, hurt hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was even lower than usual. "What if I don't know how to be family? I only know how to be invisible." The millionaire's heart shattered a little more. How to explain to a 5-year-old child that family wasn't something you learned, but something you built day after day, through small gestures and mutual care? "We'll learn together," he replied, extending his hand. "I don't know much about being family either. It's been a long time since I've been alone." She looked at the outstretched hand for long seconds. It was more than an invitation. It was a bridge between two worlds that should never have met, but that fate had conspired to unite. Slowly, hesitantly, she touched his fingers with hers. It was just a touch, fragile as the wing of a butterfly. But at that moment, under an awning soaked by the rain, two lost souls found the first thread of hope that they would weave together in the days to come. The transition wasn't simple. The millionaire had imagined that it would be enough to take the girl to his penthouse, and that was it. Problem solved, life transformed, happily ever after guaranteed. Reality proved infinitely more complex and challenging than any business negotiation he had ever faced. On the first day, she refused to take a bath, not out of stubbornness, but out of fear. The hot water, the soft towels, the marble bathroom, it all seemed too unreal to be true. She huddled in a corner of the guest room he had prepared, clutching her dirty piece of cardboard, watching everything with the distrust of a wild animal in captivity. "It's too clean," she whispered, when he asked what was wrong. "Places like this aren't for people like me." The sentence hit him like a punch to the gut. A 5-year-old child had already internalized the idea that there were places where she didn't belong, that there were levels of dignity that were denied her by birth. How to deconstruct years of conditioning to invisibility in a few hours? He hired a child psychologist specializing in abandonment trauma. Dr. Martinez was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and infinite patience. Her first session with the girl lasted only 15 minutes. She refused to speak, remaining huddled in an armchair, watching the professional as if she expected to be attacked at any moment. "She's going to need time," Dr. Martinez explained to the millionaire after the failed session. "Abandonment traumas create very deep defense mechanisms. She's learned that trusting is dangerous, that clinging to something means preparing to lose it. We can't simply tell her that everything is okay now. She needs to feel it, and that can take months. Months." The word echoed in the millionaire's mind as he watched the girl eat dinner alone at the 12-person dining table. She ate slowly, chewing each bite carefully, as if she still expected someone to appear to take the food from her. Between bites, her eyes moved constantly, cataloging exits, assessing imaginary threats. The nights were particularly difficult. The room he had prepared with so much care, bed with a canopy, wallpaper with colorful butterflies, shelves full of toys, remained practically untouched. She slept on the floor, next to the bed, wrapped in an old blanket she had brought from the street. When he tried to convince her to use the bed, she shook her head firmly. "The floor is safer," she explained. "If someone comes, I can run faster." Run where? They were on the 47th floor of a residential building with 24-hour security, but for a mind shaped by the constant need to escape, no place was safe enough. She still lived as if she were on the street, always ready to leave at any moment. The millionaire began to understand that saving that girl would require more than financial resources. It would require him to learn an emotional language that he had forgotten decades ago. He needed to rediscover patience, tenderness, the ability to offer affection without expecting anything in return. He contracted a team of professionals, in addition to the psychologist, a pediatrician to take care of her physical health weakened by malnutrition, an educator to begin the literacy that had been interrupted by life on the streets, a nutritionist to develop a food plan that would gradually restore her weight. But it was the small, everyday gestures that began to make a difference. When he discovered that she was afraid of the dark, he installed small nightlights throughout the apartment, creating illuminated paths that she could follow if she needed to move during the night. When he realized that she was startled by sudden noises, he began to announce his presence before entering any room where she was. Gradually, she began to explore the apartment. First only during the day, then also during the night. She discovered the library and was fascinated by the books, even though she couldn't read most of them. She spent hours leafing through pages, tracing the letters with her index finger, inventing stories based on the illustrations. It was through the books that she began to talk more. She showed him the figures she liked best, asked him to read the stories aloud. Her voice, previously reduced to whispers, began to gain volume and confidence. There were still moments of total silence, when some painful memory haunted her, but these episodes became less frequent. The millionaire was also changing. His obsessive work routine was forcibly altered. He could no longer stay late at the office. There was a child at home who needed dinner, help with a bath, a story before bed. Meetings that had previously stretched for hours were shortened. Business trips were cancelled or postponed. His partners began to comment on his new phase, some with curiosity, others with concern. The man who had previously lived only to multiply his millions now arrived late to meetings because he had stopped to buy a children's storybook. The ruthless executive who had already fired hundreds of employees without batting an eye now insisted on knowing details about the company's maternity leave policies. "You're different," commented his personal lawyer during a business lunch, "more human." The observation made him reflect. It was true. The girl's presence was melting layers of coldness that he had built up over decades. He was rediscovering emotions that he had considered lost forever. The genuine concern for the well-being of another person, the simple joy of seeing a shy smile, the satisfaction of providing security for someone who had never had it. But it wasn't all sunshine and roses. There were moments of intense frustration when she regressed and went back to behaving as she had on the street. Days when she refused to eat, to speak, to leave the room. Nights when she woke up screaming with nightmares that she couldn't or wouldn't describe. It was during one of these crises that the first major breakthrough happened. It was a Saturday morning when he heard sobs coming from her room. He found her huddled on the floor, trembling and mumbling incomprehensible words. When he tried to approach, she moved away, as she always did when she was scared. "No, please. I didn't do anything wrong," she babbled, clearly reliving some trauma. He sat down on the floor at a safe distance and began to speak in a low, calm voice. He didn't try to touch her or force any kind of contact. He just offered his presence, his reassuring voice, his words of safety. "You are safe," he repeated. "No one is going to hurt you. I am here. You are not alone." It took almost 2 hours, but gradually she stopped trembling. Her sobs turned into irregular breathing, then into tired sighs. When she finally looked him in the eyes, there was a vulnerability there that he had never seen before. "I dreamed that you were gone," she whispered, "that I woke up and you weren't here anymore." "I'm not going anywhere," he promised, and for the first time since she had arrived, he completely believed his own words. "This is your home now. You don't have to be afraid of being alone anymore." It was then that she did something that completely surprised him. Slowly, hesitantly, she approached him. First, just a few inches, then a little more, until she finally rested her head on his shoulder. It was a small gesture, almost insignificant to any outside observer. But for both of them, it represented a mountain moved, an abyss crossed, a bridge built over years of pain and distrust. They stayed like that until dawn, he sitting on the cold floor, she leaning on his shoulder, both discovering that family wasn't something you inherited by blood, but something you chose to build through patience, care, and unconditional love. 3 months had passed since the girl had arrived at the penthouse. The domestic routine had settled in with a naturalness that surprised the millionaire. Breakfast at 7:30, always with pancakes because she had discovered they were her favorite food. Lessons with the educator during the morning. She was learning to read with impressive speed, as if she wanted to make up for lost time. Free afternoons to play, explore the library, or simply talk on the balcony, watching the city below. She had gained weight. Her cheeks were no longer hollow from malnutrition. Her hair, previously tangled and lifeless, now shone with health and was always tied up with colorful hair ties that she loved to choose. More importantly, she had started to smile. Not just the shy and hesitant smiles of the first days, but genuine laughter that echoed through the hallways of the apartment like music. The millionaire was in his office, reviewing contracts, when his personal lawyer knocked on the door with a worried expression. Dr. Henry Silver was a meticulous man, specializing in family law and adoptions. He had been the one who initiated the legal process to formalize the girl's guardianship, a complex procedure involving social workers, forensic psychologists, and a mountain of bureaucratic paperwork. "We need to talk," said the lawyer, closing the door behind him. "It's about the girl. We found information about her mother." The millionaire raised his eyes from the documents, a strange sensation forming in his stomach. "What kind of information?" "I gained access to the hospital and employment records. The mother's full name, employment history, documents." The lawyer hesitated, as if he didn't know how to continue. "She worked for you, or rather, for one of your companies." The world stopped. The words echoed in the millionaire's mind like a distorted echo, impossible to process completely. "How could she have worked for me?" "Marcia Silva Santos, hired as a cleaning assistant at your company headquarters in 2018, fired in March 2019 for..." The lawyer consulted the papers, "for alleged theft of office supplies." The memories came like an avalanche. Marcia, a shy young woman, always with her head down, who cleaned the offices during the night. He had barely noticed her, as he didn't notice most of the lower-ranking employees, but he vaguely remembered the day she had been fired. Some electronic equipment had disappeared from the offices, and she had been accused. "Who made the accusation?" he asked, his voice coming out hoarsely. "One of the supervisors. He said she had been seen near the room where the equipment disappeared. There was no concrete evidence, but, well, you know how these things work. When in doubt, you fire the most vulnerable employee." The millionaire felt the ground open beneath his feet. He remembered now with painful clarity. Marcia had begged to keep her job, said she had a young daughter to raise, but the company policy was clear. Suspicion of theft resulted in immediate dismissal. He had signed the document without thinking twice, without investigating further, without caring about the consequences for that young mother. "Continue," he managed to murmur. After the dismissal, she tried to find another job, but the accusation of theft on her employment record made it very difficult. She only managed to get odd jobs, without a formal contract. The financial situation deteriorated rapidly. They were evicted from the apartment they rented 6 months later. Each word was like a shot to the chest. The millionaire began to understand the chain of events that had led the girl to that awning. Her unfair dismissal had been the first domino to fall in a devastating sequence that had culminated in a child sleeping on the street to forget the hunger. "There's more," continued the lawyer. "Marcia tried to contact you several times after the dismissal. Letters, phone calls. She even tried to get a personal meeting. She wanted to prove her innocence, ask for a second chance. But I never received her," completed the millionaire, the words bitter in his mouth. "My secretary had orders to filter those kinds of contacts." Exactly. Her attempts were systematically blocked. Eventually, she gave up. Medical records show that she was hospitalized several times in recent years, with problems related to stress and malnutrition. The last hospitalization was in January of this year. Pneumonia aggravated by life on the streets. She didn't make it. The silence that followed was deafening. The millionaire couldn't fully process the magnitude of what he had just discovered. Not only had he found an abandoned child on the street, he had found the daughter of a woman whose life he had destroyed with a bureaucratic decision made without the slightest consideration for the human consequences. "Who really stole the equipment?" he asked finally. "We investigated discreetly. There is strong evidence that it was the supervisor himself who accused her. Apparently, he sold company equipment and used vulnerable employees as scapegoats when necessary. Marcia was just another victim of a scheme that lasted for years. The cruel irony of the situation hit him like a punch to the gut. He had destroyed the life of an innocent mother, and years later, fate had placed the orphaned daughter in his path. It wasn't coincidence. It was a cosmic form of justice, an opportunity for redemption that he didn't deserve, but that he had received anyway. "Does the girl know?" he managed to ask. "No, and we need to decide if she should know. Psychologically, it could be devastating to discover that the man who is saving her is the same one who destroyed her family. On the other hand, Hiding the truth could also be harmful in the long run. The millionaire got up from his chair and walked to the panoramic window. Down below, the city teemed with life, millions of people living their own tragedies and triumphs, unaware of the drama unfolding on the 47th floor of that building. He thought of the girl, probably taking a math lesson with the educator at that moment, focused on learning the basic operations with the determination of someone who wants to make up for lost time. He thought of how she had started calling him uncle in recent weeks, how her eyes lit up when he came home from work, how she had begun to trust him for real. And he thought of Marcia, a young woman he didn't even remember that well, but who had died on the streets after her life had been shattered by his negligence. How many other Marcias had passed through his business life? How many other administrative decisions had resulted in human tragedies that he had never bothered to follow up on? "She has the right to know the truth," he said finally, his voice laden with a decision that he knew would change everything. "But not now. First, I need to figure out how to tell her without destroying the trust we've built. And I need to find a way to repair the harm I did to her mother. Repair how? I don't know yet. But I know that just taking care of the girl isn't enough. I need to honor Marcia's memory in some way. I need to ensure that other families don't go through what they went through." It was more than guilt. It was a responsibility that he had discovered in a brutal way. He couldn't undo the past, but he could ensure that the future was different. He could use his wealth and influence to create systems that protected the vulnerable instead of just maximizing profits. When he arrived home that night, he found the girl in the living room, drawing on her sheets of paper. She had recently discovered the pleasure of drawing and spent hours creating colorful worlds where there was always enough food and happy children playing in sunny parks. "Uncle!" she shouted, running to hug him as she had started doing in recent weeks. "Look what I drew today." He knelt down to be at her height and examined the drawing. It was a family, a tall man in a suit, a little girl in a colorful dress, and between them a translucent female figure, almost ghostly, but with a gentle smile. "Who is this person here?" he asked, pointing to the female figure. "It's my mom," she replied simply. "Dr. Martinez said that sometimes it helps to draw the people we love, even when they're not here anymore. She's watching over both of us now." The millionaire's heart shattered and mended at the same time. There was the truth that he hadn't yet told, expressed with the innocence of a child who didn't know that the man who was saving her was the same one who had condemned her mother. But there was also something more. Anticipated forgiveness, unconditional love, a family being built on the ruins of the past. That night, while tucking her into bed, she had finally started sleeping in the bed, no longer on the floor. He made a silent promise. He would tell her the truth when she was ready to hear it. And until then, he would do everything in his power to honor Marcia's memory and build a worthy future for her daughter. Because now he understood that it wasn't just fate that had united their lives. It was a second chance for him to redeem himself, for her to have the family she deserved, and for both of them to discover that sometimes the greatest tragedies can turn into the most beautiful opportunities for redemption. The bomb exploded on a Tuesday morning when the millionaire least expected it. He was having coffee with the girl, listening to her chatter about the book she had read with the educator, when his cell phone rang insistently. It was his press secretary, with a tense voice that immediately put him on alert. "We need to talk urgently," said the man. The press found out about the girl, and they found out about the connection to her mother too. The world stopped. The millionaire looked at the girl, who continued eating her pancakes while leafing through a storybook, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to break over their lives. How did they find out? Someone leaked information. There are reporters at the entrance of your building. The main newspapers in the city are already preparing articles. The title of one of them is "Millionaire Adopts Daughter of Employee He Wrongfully Fired." Another says, "The Business Tycoon's Belated Redemption." The millionaire's stomach clenched. He had imagined that he would have time to tell the truth to the girl in the right way, at the right moment. Now the whole world would know before she did. "Half an hour," he said to the press secretary. "I'll be there in half an hour." He hung up the phone and looked at the girl, who had sensed his tension and was watching him with worried eyes. "Did something bad happen, Uncle?" "Maybe," he replied, struggling to keep his voice calm. "Some people might come here today to ask questions about us, about our family. You have to promise that you won't open the door to anyone or talk to strangers, okay?" She nodded seriously, the experience of the streets instantly teaching her that something dangerous was happening. The instinct for survival that she had developed during her first 5 years of life was still there, sleeping just below the surface of the happy girl she had become. In the office, the millionaire found a situation of total crisis. His team of advisors was in a panic, phones ringing incessantly, computers displaying sensational headlines. The story was being constructed by the press as a melodramatic drama. The rich and cruel businessman who had destroyed a family and was now trying to buy forgiveness by adopting the orphaned child. "They're painting you as the villain," explained the press secretary. "They say it's just a marketing ploy to improve your public image, that you only adopted the girl after finding out who she was, out of guilt. What if it's true?" murmured the millionaire, more to himself than to the advisors. "What do you mean? What if they're right? What if I really only adopted her out of guilt?" The awkward silence in the room was broken only by the incessant ringing of the phones. His team looked at him as if he had gone crazy. Admitting guilt publicly would be professional suicide. His stock prices had already begun to plummet with the first news reports. Shareholders were demanding explanations. The board of directors had scheduled an emergency meeting for the end of the afternoon, but the millionaire wasn't thinking about business. He was thinking about the girl at home, who was probably realizing at that moment that something serious was happening. He was thinking about how she would react when she found out the truth in the worst possible way, through sensational headlines and malicious speculation. It was then that his lawyer entered the room with an even graver expression. "We have a bigger problem," he announced. "The district attorney's office has opened an investigation into the adoption process. They want to determine if there were any irregularities, if you used your influence to expedite the paperwork, and worse, Child Protective Services is considering removing the girl from your temporary custody until the situation is clarified." The world collapsed. The idea of losing the girl, of seeing her being taken back to the shelter system that she feared so much, was unbearable. In just a few months, she had become the center of his existence, the reason why he woke up every morning with renewed purpose. "They can't do that," he said, his voice laden with despair. "She's doing well with me. She's happy, healthy, safe. Legally, they can, yes," the lawyer replied with regret, "especially if there are suspicions that the adoption was motivated by ulterior motives. The press has created a narrative that suggests you're using the girl to whitewash your public image." The millionaire felt a cold rage spreading through his veins. Not for the attacks on his reputation, he knew how to deal with that, but for the idea that other people were deciding the girl's future based on speculation and political interests. She wasn't a chess piece to be moved according to the convenience of adults. She was a child who had suffered too much and finally found stability. "What do we need to do?" he asked. "First option, deny everything. Deny the connection to the mother. Say it was a coincidence. Hire communications experts to change the narrative," suggested the press secretary. "Second option, publicly take responsibility. Explain how you discovered the connection and why you decided to take care of the girl anyway," added the lawyer. "It's riskier for your image, but it could generate public sympathy if it's done the right way. Third option, give up the adoption before the scandal grows any bigger," murmured one of the advisors, avoiding the millionaire's gaze. Turn her over to the state and completely distance yourself from the situation. The silence that followed was glacial. The millionaire looked at the man who had suggested abandoning the girl as if he were a creature from another planet. "If you suggest that again," he said, his voice low but laden with threat, "consider yourself fired." At that moment, he understood that there was no real choice. He couldn't lie about the connection to Marcia. The truth always came out, and when it did, it would be even worse. He couldn't abandon the girl. That would be repeating the mistake he had made with her mother, abandoning the vulnerable when they needed protection the most. Only one option remained: face the storm, head on. "Let's call a press conference," he decided. "Today, I'm going to tell the whole truth. About Marcia, about how I unfairly fired her, about how I found her daughter on the street, about why I decided to take care of her. I'm going to take responsibility for what happened and explain why I'm not going to abandon her now." "That's professional suicide," murmured the press secretary. "Admitting guilt publicly will set a precedent for thousands of lawsuits. Employees fired in the past will come forward claiming injustices. Your businesses may not survive this." "Then let them not survive," replied the millionaire, surprising himself with the firmness of the answer. "I didn't build this fortune to protect it at any cost. If the choice is between my financial empire and a 5-year-old child who has already lost everything once, the choice is obvious." For the first time since he had found the girl under the awning, he completely understood his own motivations. It wasn't just guilt, it wasn't just redemption. It was love. Paternal, protective, unconditional love. She had become his daughter, in the only sense that really mattered, and he would do anything to protect her. When he returned home in the late afternoon, he found the girl hiding behind the living room sofa, with her eyes red from crying. She had managed to bypass the building's security and hear the reporters' conversations at the entrance. She had captured fragments of information that her childlike mind was trying to process. Her mother, the man who was raising her, some terrible connection between them. "Uncle," she said when she saw him, her voice small and broken, "did you know my mom?" It was the moment he had feared, but that he knew would inevitably arrive. He knelt on the floor at her height, and for the first time since they had met, he was completely honest. "Yes," he replied simply. "I knew your mom, and I need to tell you a very difficult story." What followed was the most painful conversation of his life. With careful words, appropriate for a 5-year-old child, he told about Marcia, about how she had worked at his company, about the unfair accusation that had led to her dismissal. He explained how that decision had destroyed their lives, how it had led to the suffering that had culminated in the mother's death and the daughter's life on the streets. The girl listened to him in silence, processing each word with a maturity that broke his heart. When he finished, she was quiet for long minutes, looking at her own hands. "So you saved me because you felt guilty?" she asked finally. "In the beginning, maybe," he admitted. "But now I love you as if you were my own daughter. And even if there was no connection to your mother, I would still do everything to protect you." "But you killed my mom," she said, the words coming out like stabs. "Not directly, but my actions contributed to her death, yes. And that's something I'm going to have to live with for the rest of my life." The brutal honesty of the admission created a tense silence between them. The girl got up and walked to the window, watching the city where she had spent so much time on the streets. When she turned to him again, there was a determination in her eyes that he had never seen before. "I don't want you to suffer for that forever," she said. "My mom wouldn't want that. She always said that holding anger in your heart only hurts the person who holds it." The wisdom contained in those words left him breathless. There was a child who had lost everything offering forgiveness to the man responsible for her tragedy. It was an act of grace that he didn't deserve, but that he received as the most precious gift of his life. "Do you forgive me?" he asked, his voice choked. "You saved me when I needed it most," she replied. "And you really love me. I feel it. So yes, I forgive you. But you have to promise me one thing. Anything. You have to help other kids like me, so that they don't have to sleep on the street to forget the hunger. You have to do it for my mom." It was exactly what he was planning, but hearing the request coming from her made everything more real, more urgent. She wasn't just offering forgiveness, she was showing the way to true redemption. That night, the two of them appeared together at the press conference that the millionaire had called. She insisted on staying by his side, small but determined, while he told the whole story to the cameras of the entire world. He spoke about his mistakes, about Marcia's death, about how he had found her daughter and decided to take care of her not only out of guilt, but out of love. The reporters' questions were aggressive, some cruel. They wanted to know if it was just a marketing ploy, if he planned to profit in any way from the situation. But it was the girl who answered the most difficult question. "Do you really forgive the man who caused your mother's death?" asked one reporter, with no sensitivity to the fact that she was talking to a traumatized child. The girl looked directly into the camera and said, "My mom taught me that everyone makes mistakes. What matters is what we do after the mistake. He's taking care of me now, and he's going to help other kids too." I think my mom would be happy. The images from that press conference ran around the world. The story of the millionaire who had destroyed a family and then adopted the orphaned child touched hearts globally, generating debates about corporate responsibility, social justice, and the power of forgiveness. Not everyone reacted positively. There were fierce criticisms, lawsuits, attempts to remove her from his custody, but there was also a movement of support that surprised him. Other families who had lost jobs unfairly began to share their stories. Child advocacy organizations offered partnerships. Conscious investors wanted to support his new social projects. What could have been the end of his career turned into the beginning of a new life with real purpose. The months that followed were the most challenging and transformative of the millionaire's life. The media storm had passed, leaving a trail of irreversible changes in his existence. Some of his companies suffered significant losses. Conservative shareholders stepped aside. Contracts were cancelled. But other opportunities arose. Partnerships with humanitarian organizations, investors interested in social impact businesses, contracts with companies that valued corporate responsibility. The girl had become not only his official adopted daughter, the legal process had finally concluded after months of investigations that proved the legitimacy of his intentions, but also his partner in the mission to transform personal tragedies into systemic changes. Together they created the Marcia Silva Foundation in honor of her mother. The goal was twofold: to prevent unfair dismissals through audit programs and labor mediation, and to care for children in situations of social vulnerability. The foundation's headquarters was built in the same neighborhood where the girl had lived with her mother, a tangible symbol of how money could be used to rebuild instead of just accumulate. The first project was a group home for orphaned or abandoned children, but it wasn't a regular shelter. It was a temporary home where each child received individualized attention, psychological counseling, quality education, and most importantly, the love and dignity that every child deserves. The girl insisted on participating in the architectural project, suggesting details that only someone who had lived through abandonment could think of. Nightlights in all the hallways, small and cozy spaces where children could hide when they felt scared, a library with illustrated books for those who couldn't read yet. "The children who come here are going to be scared," she explained to the architects, with the seriousness of an experienced consultant. "They're going to think it's too good to be true, so we have to make a place that seems real, but that is welcoming." The millionaire watched these meetings with a mixture of pride and pain. Pride in the wisdom and compassion she demonstrated, pain for knowing that this maturity had been achieved through suffering that no child should experience. The second project was even more ambitious, a guaranteed basic income program for families in extreme poverty, with a special focus on single mothers. The goal was to prevent other children from going through what the girl had gone through. Each beneficiary family received not only financial support, but psychological counseling, vocational training, legal assistance, and medical care. It's so that no mother has to choose between buying food and paying rent, the girl explained during a meeting with potential donors. My mum had to make those choices. It's very hard for a mum. Her words touched those present more deeply than any business presentation could. Donations began to arrive from unexpected places. Businessmen who had never been interested in social causes began to contribute. The foundation's story spread, inspiring similar projects in other cities. But it wasn't just the external projects that were changing. The family dynamic between the millionaire and the girl was also evolving in surprising and beautiful ways. She had started calling him Dad in intimate moments, when she was scared or needed comfort. The first time this happened, he felt such an intense emotion that he needed to lock himself in the bathroom to cry with relief and gratitude. He had never imagined that being a father could be so challenging and at the same time so rewarding. The girl had also become more assertive in expressing her opinions and desires. The fearful child who hid behind sofas had given way to a small leader who defended her ideas with solid arguments. When he suggested hiring a private tutor to accelerate her studies, she shook her head firmly. "I want to go to a regular school," she said, "with other kids. I've been alone for too long." The first week of school was an emotional roller coaster for both of them. She was nervous about interacting with children her age after so long. He was anxious about leaving her in an environment that he couldn't completely control. But gradually, she began to blossom. She made friends, participated in extracurricular activities, even volunteered to present a project about different families to the entire school. "Not every family is made of people who were born together," she explained to her classmates, in front of a poster with photos of her and her adoptive father. "Sometimes we choose who will be our family, and that's just as important as being born together." The teacher commented afterward that she had never seen such a mature and touching presentation coming from such a young child. The millionaire, who watched hidden in the back of the room, felt his chest swell with paternal pride. The nights became special moments of connection between them. She had made it a habit to do a day report before bed, telling everything she had learned, felt, and thought. He returned the favor by sharing pieces of his own childhood, stories about Elena that he had never told anyone, reflections on how he was learning to be a father. "Do you think Mom would be proud of me?" she asked one of those nights, while he helped her choose a book to read. "I'm absolutely sure," he replied, kissing the top of her head. "She would be proud of the brave and kind girl you've become, and she would be happy to know that you're being loved as you deserve. And do you think Elena would be happy that you found me?" The question caught him off guard. She rarely mentioned Elena directly, although she knew the whole story. But at that moment, there was a connection being made that was both painful and healing. "I think so," he replied after thinking carefully. "I think she would be happy to know that I managed to help a child who needed it, even though I couldn't help her. Maybe she and Mom are friends now," said the girl with the naturalness of children, "to accept mysteries that adults can't explain. Maybe they're watching over both of us together." The mental image of the two women, Elena, the sister he hadn't been able to save, and Marcia, the employee he had unfairly fired, taking care of them from beyond, was both comforting and devastating. He understood that carrying the two losses wasn't a burden that diminished with time, but a responsibility that grew and transformed into purpose. 6 months after the creation of the foundation, they made their first official visit to the group home. The girl insisted on meeting each child personally, remembering all the names, asking about their dreams and fears. When one of the younger girls, only 3 years old, said that she was afraid of the dark, she immediately suggested that they install more nightlights. "When we're scared, we need light to remember that we're not alone," she explained to the child, crouching down to be at her height. "And here, you'll never be alone." The millionaire watched these interactions with a growing understanding that he hadn't just saved a child from the streets. He had found a partner in the mission to transform pain into hope, tragedy into purpose. The girl wasn't just his daughter. She was his teacher in the art of transforming material wealth into emotional and social wealth. When they returned home that night, she sat next to him on the sofa and asked a question that revealed how much she had understood about the journey they were sharing. "Dad, do you think we can turn all the bad things that happened into good things?" "Not all," he replied honestly. "Some pains we carry forever, but we can use those pains to prevent other people from going through the same suffering. So bad things are good for something? Sometimes, when we choose to use them to do good." She reflected on this for a few minutes, then nodded her head as if she had reached an important conclusion. "Then I choose that everything that happened to me and Mom serves to help other children. That way, it wasn't all for nothing." At that moment, the millionaire understood that he had found not only a daughter, but a soulmate in the mission of giving meaning to suffering through service to others. Together, they were building something that transcended their individual stories. They were creating a legacy of hope that would continue far beyond their lives. 1 year after the creation of the foundation, an unexpected situation would test all the progress they had made. The millionaire received a call that would change the course of their lives again. An aunt of the girl had been located, Marcia's sister, who had been looking for her niece since her sister's death. The woman's name was Rosa. She was 40 years old, married, and had just achieved financial stability after years of struggle. She had tried to locate the girl through official channels, but bureaucracy and the lack of proper documentation had made the search fruitless. It was only when the story gained notoriety in the media that she managed to track down where her niece was. The news hit the millionaire like a punch to the gut. Legally, Rosa had rights over the girl. She was blood family, and the justice system favored family reunification whenever possible. There was a real chance that he would lose the daughter he had learned to love unconditionally. When he told the girl about the existence of her aunt, her reaction was complex and painful to watch. There was genuine joy in discovering that she had living biological family, but also palpable fear of losing the stability she had finally achieved. "Is she like Mom?" asked the girl, trying to process the information. "I don't know," he admitted, "but she really wants to meet you. She says she's been looking for you for months. What if she takes me away?" The question he feared most had been asked with the brutal simplicity of children. How to explain that there were legal and social forces that could separate a family that had formed through love and mutual need? "I don't know what's going to happen," he replied honestly. "But what I do know is that you'll always have a place with me no matter what happens. You're my daughter, and that will never change." The first meeting with Rosa was scheduled to take place in a neutral environment, with the presence of psychologists and social workers. The millionaire was more nervous than he had been in any billion-dollar negotiation of his business career. The girl also showed anxiety, holding firmly to his hand as they walked to the meeting room. Rosa was a more mature version of Marcia, the same kind eyes, the same shy smile, the same delicate way of gesturing with her hands. When she saw her niece, her eyes filled with tears, but she was careful not to approach too quickly, respecting the child's space. "You look just like your mother when she was your age," Rosa said softly. "She talked about you a lot. Every time we spoke, she would tell me some funny thing you had done." The girl watched her attentively, cataloguing similarities and differences, trying to figure out if she could trust this new family figure. "Where were you when Mom died?" she asked directly. "I was living far away, trying to find work," Rosa replied, the pain evident in her voice. "When I managed to come back and look for you, it was too late. Your mother had died, and you had disappeared. I looked everywhere. Why didn't you talk to each other? We had a silly fight years ago. About things that seem so small now. I regret every day not having apologized sooner." Rosa's honesty was gradually winning the girl's trust. During the meeting, she told stories about Marcia that the child had never heard. How they played when they were little, the dreams that Marcia had for the future, how happy she had been when she found out she was going to be a mother. "Your mum showed me a picture of you when you were 2 years old," Rosa said, taking a yellowed photograph out of her bag. "She carried this everywhere. She said you were the most important thing in her life." Seeing the photo was a moment of revelation for the girl. It was an image of her smiling on Marcia's lap, both looking happy and carefree. There was a life before poverty, before suffering, before the struggle for survival. There was love, there was family, there were moments of pure joy. After the meeting, the way back home was silent. The girl processed everything she had heard and felt, while the millionaire struggled against his own fears of abandonment and loss. "Did you like her?" he asked finally. "She seems nice," the girl replied thoughtfully. "And she really loved Mom. I feel it. Is that important to you?" "It is. But..." She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "She wasn't here when I needed her." "You were." In the days that followed, Rosa visited several times. She brought family photo albums, told more stories about Marcia, brought carefully chosen gifts. It was clear that she loved her niece genuinely and wanted the best for her. But it was also clear that there was an unvoiced tension about the future. The final decision came from the girl herself, in a way that surprised all the adults involved. "I want both of you to be my family," she announced during a family meeting. "Aunt Rosa is Mum's family and Dad is the family I chose. Why do I have to choose just one?" The simplicity of the solution proposed by a 6-year-old child exposed the unnecessary complexity that the adults had created. Why, in fact, did she have to choose between biological love and adoptive love? Why couldn't she have both? What followed was a delicate but goodwill-filled negotiation. Rosa acknowledged that the millionaire had saved the girl's life and built a solid paternal relationship with her. The millionaire acknowledged that Rosa represented a vital connection to the girl's history and biological family. Together, they reached an agreement that prioritized the child's well-being above legal or territorial issues. Custody remained with the millionaire, but Rosa became a constant presence in the girl's life. She spent weekends with her aunt, met her cousins, participated in family gatherings where she heard more stories about Marcia. At the same time, she continued her daily life with her adoptive father, her studies, her participation in the Foundation's projects. "It's like having 2 homes," she explained to her friends at school. "One where I grew up, and another where I discovered where I come from." The experience of almost losing the girl deeply transformed the millionaire. He understood that true paternal love wasn't possessive. It was liberating. Loving someone meant wanting what was best for that person, even if it meant sharing or even giving up. Rosa also became a valuable ally in the Foundation's projects. As someone who had experienced poverty and the struggle for survival, she brought a practical perspective that complemented the millionaire's financial resources. Together, they created even more effective programs to support vulnerable families. The girl flourished in this environment of multiple love and collaborative support. She was learning that family wasn't a rigid structure with fixed rules, but a flexible network of people who committed to caring for each other. She was discovering that it was possible to honor the past while building the future, that it was possible to carry the memory of her mother while embracing new relationships. On her 7th birthday, celebrated at a party that brought together Rosa's extended family, the foundation's employees, and her friends from school, she made a speech that left all the adults present emotional. "When I was little and lived on the street, I thought family was only who you were born with," she said, standing on a chair so that everyone could see her. "But now I know that family is who chooses to stay together, even when things get difficult. Thank you for all of you having chosen to be my family." At that moment, the millionaire understood that the journey that had begun with guilt and redemption had transformed into something much greater. He wasn't just raising a daughter. He was learning that love multiplies when it is shared, that family grows when it is generous, that happiness becomes deeper when it is built on the solid foundation of service to others. 5 years had passed since that rainy night when the millionaire found a girl huddled under an awning. Now at 10 years old, she had become an articulate, confident, and deeply compassionate young woman, whose ideas directly influenced the course of the foundation that bore the name of her biological mother. The Marcia Silver Foundation had grown beyond all expectations. What began as a local project now operated in 12 cities had helped more than 1,000 families escape extreme poverty and created a model of social intervention that was being replicated internationally. But the growth hadn't diluted the original purpose. Each project still carried the personal mark of the girl who had inspired its creation. The original group home was now part of a network of 7 units, each designed with the subtle details that only someone who had lived through abandonment could conceive. Small spaces for moments of solitude, cozy libraries, gardens where children could plant their own flowers, art studios where they could express traumas and hopes through colors and shapes. Every child who arrives here brings a unique story, the girl explained to visitors and donors, with the naturalness of someone who had been born to lead. "We can't treat them as if they were all the same, just because they all suffered. Suffering doesn't define us. What we do with it is what defines us." Her precocious wisdom impressed psychologists, educators, and social workers who worked with her. At 10 years old, she understood nuances of childhood trauma and resilience that many professionals took decades to assimilate, not because she had studied theories, but because she had lived the realities that those theories tried to explain. The millionaire observed this development with a mixture of paternal pride and professional admiration. The girl had become not only his daughter, but his most valuable partner in the mission to transform financial resources into real social impact. She participated in meetings with donors, presented projects to administrative boards, and her opinions were considered with the same respect reserved for expert consultants. But it was in the intimate moments, away from the foundation's spotlights, that her most impressive transformation was revealed. The child who once slept on the floor out of fear now conducted home visits with friends from school with the confidence of an experienced hostess. The girl who once whispered to become invisible now sang loudly in the shower, laughed during movies, and discussed international politics during dinner. "Dad," she said one Sunday night while they did the 1,000-piece puzzle together that had become a weekly tradition, "do you think my biological mom would be surprised with who I've become?" It was a question she asked periodically, always with subtle variations that revealed different aspects of her ongoing search for identity and purpose. "I think she would be proud, but not surprised," he replied, fitting a piece of the puzzle's blue sky. "You've always had this strength inside you. The circumstances only revealed what was already there. And you, were you surprised?" "Every day," he admitted with a smile. "You teach me things I never knew I needed to learn." It was true. Her presence had transformed not only his habits and priorities, but his fundamental way of understanding the world. Through her eyes, he had learned to see the city differently, no longer as a field of economic opportunities, but as a complex ecosystem where each person carried their own story of struggle and hope. When they walked through the streets, something he had previously done only inside cars with tinted windows, she pointed out details he had never noticed. The flower vendor who always saved the best roses for customers who clearly couldn't afford them. The lady who swept the sidewalk in front of the building and always greeted each passerby with a genuine smile. The group of young people who gathered in the square not to cause trouble, but to practice street dance because they didn't have money for formal classes. The city is full of good people doing good things, she observed during one of those walks. We just don't see it because we're not paying attention to the right people. This ability to find goodness in places where others saw only problems had become a trademark not only of her, but of the entire family they had built. Rosa had also developed this perspective, and together they formed an informal investigative team that discovered inspiring stories in the most unexpected places. It was during one of those investigations that they discovered John, a 60-year-old homeless man who had created an informal literacy project for other homeless people. He taught reading and writing using old newspapers found in the trash under the awning of a subway station. When the girl met him, she immediately proposed including him in the foundation's projects. "He's already doing the work," she argued to the administrative board. "We just need to give him the resources to do it better." John became the coordinator of the foundation's adult education program, proving that the best solutions often already exist in the communities. They just need recognition and support. This approach of discovering and empowering local initiatives became the core philosophy of the Marcia Silver Foundation. Instead of imposing external solutions, they identified people who were already making a difference in their communities and offered resources to amplify those efforts. The girl had developed a special talent for identifying these invisible heroes, as she called them. On the 10th anniversary of the foundation, they organized a ceremony that brought together all the beneficiary families, employees, volunteers, and partners. The event took place in the gymnasium of the first school built by the foundation, in the same neighborhood where the girl had lived with Marcia. 10 years ago, she said into the microphone, now 15 years old and with a maturity that impressed everyone. A 5-year-old girl slept on the street because she had nowhere to go. Today, that same girl is here talking to you because someone decided to stop and see. It wasn't just the money that changed my life. It was someone who decided to see an invisible child and believe that she deserved a chance. The audience was completely silent, absorbing each word. My biological mother, Marcia, died on the streets because the system failed her, but her death was not in vain, because through her, thousands of other families found hope. My adoptive father could have kept his guilt to himself and continued his comfortable life, but he chose to transform error into purpose, pain into action. The millionaire, now with grey hair but eyes brighter than ever, felt tears run down his face. Not tears of sadness, but of deep gratitude for having been an instrument of a transformation that transcended his own limitations. What we have learned in these 10 years, she continued, is that there are no problems too small to matter, nor people too small to make a difference. Each of you who is here proves this. Every child who found a home, every family who escaped hunger, every person who learned to read, every dream that was fulfilled, all of this started with someone deciding that it was worth trying. She paused, looking at the diverse audience that represented a decade of collaborative work. I don't remember anymore what it's like to be hungry every day. I don't remember anymore what it's like to sleep on the street in fear. But I will never forget that there is a difference between not having food and not having hope. We kill the hunger of the body with food. We kill the hunger of the soul with love, dignity, and opportunity. After the speech, there was a special presentation. 50 children who had passed through the Foundation's group homes sang a song that they themselves had composed about second chances and chosen families. The simple but profound lyrics echoed through the gymnasium. It doesn't matter where you were born. It doesn't matter what you've been through. What matters is who sees you when everyone else is silent. The millionaire observed the performance with a complete understanding of how much his life had changed. The man who once measured success only in numbers now saw true wealth in the smiles of those children, in the restored dignity of the beneficiary families, in the network of love and support that had been woven over a decade. That night, when they returned home, father and daughter sat on the penthouse balcony, watching the city that stretched out below them. The lights punctuated the darkness like terrestrial stars, each representing a life, a story, a possibility. "Dad," she said, now calling him that naturally, without hesitation, "do you know what's the most important thing you taught me?" "What?" "That we don't need to be perfect to make a difference. We just need to try, even when we make mistakes." He smiled, remembering the similar conversation they had had years ago, when she was much smaller and forgiveness was still something new between them. "And do you know what's the most important thing you taught me?" he asked. "What?" That it's never too late to start living for real." They remained in comfortable silence, each reflecting on the journey they had shared. The girl who had slept on the street to forget the hunger now daydreamed about projects to eradicate childhood hunger throughout the region. The millionaire who had built an empire based only on profit now found satisfaction in each life, transformed by the foundation. "What do you want to do when you grow up?" he asked, a question he asked periodically, always curious about how her dreams evolved. "I want to expand the foundation to other countries," she replied without hesitation. "I don't want any child in the world to have to sleep on the street." "Is that too ambitious?" "For anyone else, maybe," he said proudly. "For you, it's just a matter of time and planning." Because he had learned that she possessed something that all the money in the world couldn't buy, the credibility of someone who had lived the problem she was trying to solve, and the determination of someone who had experienced both despair and redemption. Years later, when biographers tried to document the story of the Marcia Silver Foundation, they always came across the same question: had it been the millionaire who saved the girl, or the girl who saved the millionaire? The answer, for those who knew the whole story, was obvious. They had saved each other. The girl had found not only a home, but a purpose that gave meaning to all the suffering she had experienced. The millionaire had found not only a daughter, but a soulmate in the mission to transform privilege into social responsibility. And Marcia, the young mother who had died on the streets after being unfairly fired, had found a form of immortality through the foundation that bore her name, and the daughter who grew up to honor her memory by serving the most vulnerable. On the last night before the girl left for college, at 18 years old, with a full scholarship to study international human rights, they took one last walk through the neighborhood where it had all begun. They passed by the awning where she had slept, now transformed into a meal distribution point of the foundation. They visited the site where the old boarding house where she had lived with Marcia used to be, now occupied by one of the foundation's schools. "Do you have any regrets?" she asked, stopping in front of the plaque that marked the first group home. "Just one," he replied. "I regret having taken so long to understand that true wealth is not in what we accumulate, but in what we share. And I regret having thought that I was invisible for so long," she said, "when in reality I was just waiting for the right person to see me." They hugged there on the sidewalk, where a decade and a half earlier a child had learned to sleep to forget the hunger, and where now hundreds of families found not only food, but dignity and hope. The story that had begun with a devastating sentence, "I sleep a lot to forget the hunger," had transformed into a legacy that guaranteed that no child would need to utter those words again. The To Forget the Hunger project had fulfilled its mission, not only to feed bodies, but to nourish souls, restore hope, and prove that sometimes the greatest transformations begin with a simple gesture of compassion. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications to receive new stories every day. What would you do in the millionaire's place? Comment below and share this story with someone special.